So it is January 20th. It's really only been a few weeks since the last couple of updates that I filmed. Um, but, well, what can I say? I've been watching loads of movies, gotten quite a few things recently. I was able to get some stuff after Christmas for some Christmas money, so some of this is from that. But really, it's just stuff from all over the place that I've been watching recently, as always. But although a few things in the beginning, I'm going to talk about very briefly a few things that I haven't seen yet. So the only reason why I include them now is because I'm not sure exactly when I'll get around to watching these. But when I have seen them, I'll probably come back and talk about them a little bit more. With the possible exception of this one, because I've already seen these a few years ago. Project A1 and 2, of course released by Eureka here, two Jackie Chan movies. I have them on DVD, but definitely have to get this. I don't really remember too much from these movies. I've seen them at least once, maybe a couple times, but I couldn't say for sure. But I definitely enjoyed the Police Story movies. I thought the transfers for those were just excellent. I actually went and got my DVD from my shelf and I put that in the PS3 player. Then I put the Blu-ray from Eureka in the PS4 player, and then I sort of switched back and forth, and the difference was crystal clear. I mean, I wouldn't have had to switch back and forth because I would have remembered that, oh man, this looks so much better. you know. So I have high hopes for this from that. So I really enjoyed watching those movies again, and I think I'll enjoy watching these again. But these, I don't know these as well as I knew the Police Story movies, so I think I'll enjoy these even more actually, because they're gonna feel more like a new experience, I suppose. But yeah, so it's really cool to see that Eureka are putting out a bunch of Jackie Chan stuff. I mean, now it's definitely undoubtable, or whatever. They really are trying to put out lots of not just Jackie Chan movies, but martial arts movies, and that's good to see. I mean, I was never a massive fan, but I was certainly always a fan. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, I was always a big fan of Jackie Chan, but generally of martial arts, I was never a massive fan. Well, anyway, yeah, but so that's cool. Okay, and then this next one I've actually had for, I believe, a few months, but I haven't gotten to them yet. I haven't really found the right time for them, but I do think I'll enjoy these. I think I'll probably like them, and it's such a good-looking box set. The Complete Sartana. So we have 5 movies in here. I haven't really heard anything about these, as far as I know, besides, people talking about the box set. But I didn't recognize the name Sartana when they announced it, so... I mean, I think I'll enjoy these. Yeah, so... happy to have it. Now this next one I'd like to get to soon, because I think I'll really like it, and it's something that I'm really happy to have. But we'll see when I get to it. But it's Berlin Alexanderplatz. Let's see, it says a film in 13 parts and an epilogue by Rainer Werner Fassbinder, and I haven't really seen much from him. But I know very well who he is, and I know that he died at the age of 30. Well, I looked up the exact age, and he died at the age of 37. But I don't know if there's anybody who was more prolific or more productive in that short of a career than he was, because he made so many movies, and not just movies for the sake of movies. I mean, he seems to have made so many movies that have made an impression on people, all in just maybe 15 years. I mean, he wasn't even 40 when he died, and he's made so many movies that people have talked about. Yet I've only seen one of them. I've only seen Fear Eats the Soul, which I saw years ago. That's it. So I'd like to see more. I'd like to see more from him, and this has sort of always been the main film slash series from him that I have been wanting to see, and this is released by Second Sight. Another reason why I'm particularly happy with this is because Second Sight recently put out Heimat, which was made around the same time, and it's a German series, and I loved it. It's just one of those things that I absolutely adored. And so this is, you know, also I mean, it's from the same time, it's from the same country, and it made sense to get this, having enjoyed that. But I think I would have probably wanted to get this otherwise. But anyway, yes, it's a nice looking set. I don't really like J cards like here on the back, because they're gonna just get scuffed and stuff. So I put that in here. But anyway, now the next everything that you're gonna see next, I've seen. So I bought Candyman from Arrow. Have seen this before, and I remember liking it, but I didn't remember too much about the actual movie. Watching it again, some things come back to me, like some of the locations come back to me. I do like the locations. That's one of the things that I really like about it, actually. But overall, I wouldn't say that it's a favorite. I don't really think I can appreciate it more now than what I did back then, which is sort of unusual. But it's just not really a favorite of mine. But I do like it, and it's a good release, of course. Very nice looking release. A couple commentaries here. I actually, there's one with Bernard Rose, the director, and Tony Todd, who actually plays Candyman, which I couldn't really get into that actually. But there is a commentary with a couple author, Stephen Jones and Kim Newman, which was really good actually, which I'd recommend listening to if you're a fan of genre and stuff like that. And then there's a few interviews. So yeah, a great release for a movie that I like, but not a huge fan of. Another release from Arrow, which I was really curious about and excited to get, Deadbeat at Dawn. So it's interesting that for a movie that I've never heard of before, or until Arrow started talking about it, I was so stoked to see this. And I think it's because it was hyped up by Arrow and by, well, maybe, I don't know if they hyped it up, but the people who commented seemed to hype it up. And then I looked it up, and it was like one of those things where, wow, this looks really good, and the special features are gonna be so much fun. They actually announced the Blu-ray. Well, they announced that that they were gonna announce it, so to speak. They revealed months back, I don't even know when, but sometime last year, quite a while ago, that they were going to release it, but they hadn't announced the Blu-ray yet. So I've been waiting for this for a while. Yeah, I'm not gonna say that I was disappointed, because I wasn't really exactly sure what to expect. I mean, I knew that there was gonna be a low budget kind of exploitation movie, kind of a passion project by this guy Jim Van Beber, who wrote or stars in the film. I mean, he wrote, directed, and stars in the film, and it's his movie. There's no way this would exist without him. He's the sort of the madman with a vision here, and yeah, and the movie is definitely fun. Maybe it dragged a little bit in some parts, but I think that's excusable for a film made with no budget, and by somebody who's simply just passionate about what he's doing. But I never really got into the movie the way I was hoping to, although the ending is pretty crazy and actually really well filmed with all the angles and the editing. It actually manages to keep a pretty high pace or high energy, and I was actually pretty impressed by the ending, all the cinematography and choreography towards the end. So overall, a fun movie. definitely a fun movie, but I wouldn't say that I was a huge fan of it. Special feature wise, I actually didn't really enjoy those as much as I thought I would either. But hey, it's still a good release if you like the movie. I think you'll want to get that. This next one I'd like to make a separate video about, but I don't think I'll get around to it. But it's worth talking about in a separate video for sure. From Lift to The Road, the films of Mark Isaacs. This is released by a second run. I don't know if they've done a Blu-ray box set like this before. They've done DVD box sets. I don't own any of them, but I know that they've done them. But a Blu-ray box set like this, I'm not sure if I've seen from them. But this is definitely one that I wanted to see. I just, by chance, happened to see that they were... I mean, I think I went on to their website for some reason, and I just happened to see coming up like a box set with everything from Mark Isaacs, and I was really happy to see that. And it's one of those releases that I knew I had to get as soon as I had the money for it, because I had seen a few of them. I'd seen Lift, Travelers, and Calais: The Last Border. They've released most of these, or if not all of these, but definitely most of them. They've released over 3 or 4 DVDs, and I have one of them. I have those that I mentioned, the first few that he did, and he's a documentary filmmaker, and I'm a fan of the genre, or a fan of documentary, and I like those quite a bit, at least, well, especially I should say, Lift and Calais: The Last Border. Those were really good, and yeah, I liked them enough to want to get this. So this collects everything he's made, except for his most recent documentary, which is about men who sleep in trucks, and I think it might even have that title. Although one of these shorts, When Night Falls, is about that, so I don't know if he made a longer feature about the same thing, or if it takes a different approach than this one. By the way, I don't know if the shorts and if these out of time installations, which is museum pieces. I mean, sometimes when I've gone to museums, I've seen, which I haven't really done by my own choice, but you know, sometimes you go with people to a museum, and often they've shown films, and they're always kind of artsy, pretentious things that, you know, I don't care too much for. And I did recognize the style in a couple of these. But anyway, that's where the that's what out of time means. So I don't know if the shorts have been included on the previous DVDs. They may not have. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I mean, I was happy to get it and to go through all these. I mean, some of them I like more than others. I'd still say that Lift is my favorite, which is maybe not entirely a compliment to a filmmaker. Excuse me. That their very first short film is the best thing they've ever done. I'm not sure if they want to hear that, but it's not like he's listening to this, but I still have to be honest and say that Lift is still my favorite from him. But Men of the City came pretty close. He uses editing in a way in that film that I haven't seen him do before or after, which actually reminded me of out of all things, it reminded me of Soviet montage. You know, the editing technique in the Soviet in like late 1910s or the 20s. As well as a little bit of Koyaanisqatsi, I suppose, and some maybe some imagery in the film which were a bit obvious, but overall I really thought that was an effective film. And yeah, the other ones, All White and Barking, an interesting film about racism, which he sort of brings up. You often hear him behind the camera asking questions. You can kind of tell that he's left-leaning, which I guess is no surprise. He's inquiring about these things. People who have prejudice, or people who are displaying xenophobia and whatnot. He's sort of inquiring about, you know, about that quite a lot in some of these movies. So, but All White in Barking is sort of about that, or about, well, Barking, who's a town, I suppose. It's becoming too multicultural for some people, and they want to do something about it. And then there's other people. I mean, the film follows different people, which a lot of his movies do. Actually, all of them do, I think. Yeah. And this one is no exception. There are other stories as well. But anyway, but all relating to that theme. Someday My Prince Will Come, I wasn't a fan of, unfortunately, but that's the only one that I really didn't like. Philip and His Seven Wives was pretty good. Outside the Court, The Road, the most recent ones here, maybe not the best, but pretty interesting. Oh yeah, I mean, so overall, I was happy to get this. So the next few are from Indicator, the next 5. So I mentioned that I took part of the Black Friday sale, and I've seen a few more of those now. There's still 7 that I haven't seen, but I have 5 here that I have seen. So I'll talk about these now. Then hopefully I'll have seen the other 7 by the time I make the next update. So guess who's coming to dinner? Yeah, this was good. Directed by Stanley Kramer, about I guess about racial prejudice, not really about racism, but it's from 1967. It's about I actually thought that this might have been a few years earlier than that, but it's from 1967. Yeah, I suppose racial prejudice is what it's about. It's a very grounded, sort of natural movie. It's not really over dramatic, which I think Stanley Kramer might be known for, or maybe not. Well, I shouldn't say that, because I don't entirely know, but I've heard a couple people perhaps saying things like that he was an unsentimental guy. I could be completely wrong, but this movie is not very sentimental. Maybe towards the ending it is a bit, but I just sort of respected how it dealt with this issue in a very realistic way. It's about, I mean, I think people probably know what it's about, but it's about, I don't know what her name is, but this Catherine Houghton, she comes home with a black guy. They're planning to marry, but they want her parents' blessing, I suppose. And her parents are played by Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, who were very good in this. And there's so much backstory behind this film, which they delve into in the special features, or they have dug up some old featurettes, I suppose, from old DVDs or whatever from TV, which is really interesting. I'm not going to get into that now, because there's a lot behind the scenes here in this film, with the two of them especially. I just liked the way the film dealt with these topics in a way that sort of made sense. And Spencer Tracy plays a guy who is very progressive, but then he starts to see what he perceives to be some problems with them getting married. They're an interracial couple. He starts to having growing doubt about this, about whether this is a good idea. And I like the way it's dealt with. It's not a great film. It never really reaches any sort of revelatory heights, but it's still a pretty well made, and it's definitely a really well acted film. It's definitely one of those films that I've heard about quite a few times. Here we have The Last Detail, which I've seen before. I think one of the few indicator releases that I've seen before. I mean, usually they seem to focus on lesser seen films, but this one is definitely a classic from Hal Ashby. This is such a great moving movie. Otis Young, I don't really know much about him. I looked him up, and he doesn't seem to have done too much. Randy Quaid and Jack Nicholson, I'm a fan of both, and they're both great in this. It's just a really moving film with a last scene or a last sequence that it makes perfect sense, but the way it's played out, it's just incredible. I don't know what to say, how to describe it. It's the culmination of these characters' journey together, and it's really well done. Here we have the 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, which I was pretty impressed with for a while, especially the scene here with the ladder. The way, I mean, and these guys are standing below, he's climbing the ladder. I don't know if the set was huge or if they've used, how they've done it. I mean, it's pretty clear that they've used big sets, but that scene, the scope of that scene, or the scale, was just crazy. And that scene was pretty impressive. And then maybe it started dragging a little bit after that, or in some parts. It wasn't quite able to live up to some of the scenes, or it didn't really keep that up through the entire film. But it was still a pretty damn fun film about well, this boy, he goes into a fantasy / nightmare, I guess, where his piano teacher is this tyrannical guy who wants to control everything, and and he doesn't, in real life, he doesn't want to play the piano, so he goes in, I guess he falls asleep, and this piano teacher becomes the antagonist of his dreams, or of this whatever, the fantasy world that he goes into, and it's actually a pretty clever little movie. I think, speaking of Stanley Kramer, he produced this one. A Day in the Death of Joe Egg. Really good satire, actually, about, or it's a black comedy at least, about two parents who have to deal with a child who is completely disabled, or she is, I mean, I don't know what word to describe. I mean, she's practically brain dead. She doesn't do anything, so they have to deal with a child like that, and having a child who have problems like that demands a certain strength, and they find their strength in humor, which is why it's a black comedy. And it took me a while to figure it out, to figure out where the film was going, or what it wanted to do. So rewatching this should be pretty interesting, I think. But it made sense after a while, and some really moving scenes. And there's a scene where they take their child to sorry, not a fair, not a theme park, but I don't really know what to call it, but some kind of attraction in some place where you take your kids for to have fun, and they take her there, but she can't enjoy it, and they don't really know. I mean, they still want to take their child to do something. They want to give her stuff, but she can't really enjoy anything because she's not responding and she's not really present. But they still do it. They still take her there, and yeah, that was to me a really moving scene. Here we have Torture Garden, which is the last one out of the indicators. This is an Amicus anthology film. Let's see, there were 4 different stories, out of which the last one was easily my favorite. The last one is with Jack Palance and Peter Cushing, where they play to Edgar Allan Poe, obsessive collectors, and that just sounds too good not to enjoy. The other ones, and it was really fun. It was a bit cheesy, but I thought that was perfectly fine. The other ones I wasn't really a big fan of. The third one with, well, I shouldn't say exactly what happens, but it's with a piano. it was a fun idea, but I feel like they could have taken it a little bit further. The other two I wasn't actually a big fan of, but it might have been because of how they were filmed. I didn't really like how they were filmed, but if they had been done a bit differently, I think I would have appreciated them more. But that's sort of the big boutique label Blu-rays. But we do have another DVD box set before we move on to the separate releases, or the single releases. So this is the Dardenne, or the Dardenne Brothers collection, which features, let's see, The Promise, Rosetta, The Son, The Child, The Silence of Lorna, and The Kid with a Bike. So these are, I believe, Belgian directors, French language films, and they're all really good. They have a certain style where it's all very realistic or naturalistic, or there's not really any music. The cameraman the camera is always handheld. I don't even think they use a tripod. It always follows the people around, sort of behind them, and follows them in their day-to-day life, and it doesn't really go into great detail towards explaining the plot or giving you exposition. It sort of explains things through details and through following them and what they're doing. And after a while, you get the hang of their or you understand their situation. And they're all like that, really, pretty much anyway. And I really like them. I really like their style of filmmaking. I don't know which ones would be my favorites. It's hard to say. Maybe Rosetta and The Child, maybe The Son as well. But they're all good. Yeah, I like them all. And he uses some actors again. So you see some familiar faces. And there's interviews here where they talk about the films, so you get to know them as well through the box set, if that makes sense. I had a fun time with, I had a good time with that. There are a few more that they've done after the release of this set, that they've made after these ones that are included in the set. One of them is received some attention a few years back, a movie with Marion Cotillard. I forget the exact title, but that definitely got some attention a while back. So I'd like to see that. Then there's one more called The Unknown Girl, I think. So there's a couple more that I haven't seen, but I had a good time with those. So here's one called James White. This one I liked quite a bit up until the ending. I'm not really going to talk about the plot, but I thought that it took me a while to get into this film, but once I did, I really liked it. Christopher Abbott and Cynthia Nixon, they're both really good in this. And as the movie progresses, you understand more and more what their situation is, and you can relate to them more. And then the last sequence, or the last act, I suppose, is really well acted and just rather devastating. And the way that ends, and the way the film ends, leaves just no resolution at all. And that's fine sometimes with an ambiguous ending or a downbeat ending, if there's a reason for that. But it leaves you feeling like you're not, I don't know, it leaves you feeling that what you were just watching was kind of meaningless in a way, kind of bleak for the sake of being bleak, or maybe, well, I shouldn't say that, but unnecessarily bleak anyway. I feel like they could have added a few scenes to the end, just a couple minutes really, added something to give the movie maybe a more positive spin, or just something that made sense, because the way the movie ended didn't make sense to me. It felt like they ended it too early, and after in too dark of a place again, in an unnecessarily dark place, which didn't really benefit the film. It didn't really make sense to me. So I thought that was a bit of a shame the way the film ended. But beyond that, it's a really well done drama. I'd say check it out anyway. Maybe some people will feel differently about the ending, but yeah, it's still good. I liked it, but it's a shame the way it ended. Now the next one, maybe I should have shown these in reverse order, but Hello, I Must Be Going is also with Christopher Abbott and then Melanie Linsky, sort of the star of the movie. And I think she's a good actress. I always like her in what I see her in. She's never been a favorite actress, but I've always thought she was good in everything I've seen her in. And I saw this, and then I moved on to James White right after. And when I picked up James White, sort of taking the plastic off, I saw his name again. And I'd never heard of him before. I don't think I've seen anything with him before. I didn't know who he was, but I just seen this, and I went for the next movie to watch, and here we have the same guy again, just happened to be in both those movies. So that was a fun coincidence, and it was good too, because I was able to see two films from the same actor and compare the performances, and so that was, yeah, I enjoyed that, but I thought he was better in James White. I mean, that's his movie. This is not his movie, and he doesn't really have a ton of things to do, perhaps. And I wasn't crazy about this one. I don't think movies have to have a plot to be good. I like, actually, in a way, I prefer films that are without plot and are simply about characters and, puts you in a situation. And so I have no problems with the fact that little was happening, but it just didn't seem to be very engaging to me. Maybe her character wasn't as well written, or I honestly don't know. But this kind of fell a bit short for me. I do like Blythe Danner as well, so that's another reason for me to see this. But it was just okay. A Quiet Place, picked up sort of randomly, but I did want to see this. I had heard some good things about it. Felt a bit weird to me that John Krasinski was all of a sudden directing a horror film. Didn't seem like something John Krasinski would do, well, it doesn't seem like something John Krasinski would be chosen to do. Maybe I should say. I wasn't a huge fan of it. I thought it had some suspense, and I liked the location, but other than that, I wasn't a big fan of it. The ending to me felt kind of unnecessary. The way they sort of, twisted the tone towards the end. The way they left you hanging a little bit as a viewer, which can work sometimes, but in this one it just didn't really seem appropriate. But I don't know. There is coming a sequel, or there is a sequel coming. So I guess, considering there's a sequel coming, it's a pretty good ending. But I don't know. I just didn't like that. But it was fine. Like, seriously, I don't really know what to say about it, because I didn't really care too much for it. It was just kind of there for a couple hours, and I know people have had more positive things to say about it, but I didn't love it. I couldn't care less about the monsters, honestly. And the idea, they have to stay quiet or this monster is gonna come get them. I think it's down to how you do that. It does leave you wondering a couple things about the world they live in, I suppose. Like what range is the monsters? How far can they hear? How many are they? Stuff like that. How fast are they? Anyway, So I think it comes down to how you pull off something like that. I guess it was fine the way they did it, but I didn't care too much for it. Okay, so switching genres again. This one is called The Apprentices, I think. A French film, actually, with Gerard Depardieu's son, who died. I don't know exactly when, but this is from 1995. I think he died more than a decade after this. This is a fun drama comedy. Nothing too memorable. Also has Francois Cluzet, something like that. Who, by the way, looks a hell of a lot like Dustin Hoffman. At least around this time, he looked quite a lot like Dustin Hoffman, especially in some scenes. Anyway, yeah, it was pretty good. Nothing great, but it's yet another French kind of drama comedy to enjoy. I do like those kinds of movies. A movie called The Fitz. There's some pretty interesting dynamic in this film, or what it could have been. I mean, it's about this girl who is a boxer, but then there's a dancing class like adjacent to where she boxes, and maybe she starts to be a bit torn between the two. But and you know, the movie has a really natural quality to it. The way the director has captured the scenes makes me think that she either really got to know these people and she managed to bring their natural qualities out, or she found some really good actors. But yeah, so I thought that it was pretty well observed, like well played out, the scenes themselves, but it left me completely uninterested in what was happening, because it just wasn't see, using the same words over and over, but it wasn't engaging enough. There wasn't enough character development or enough character at all. It didn't really delve deep enough into the psychological aspect. Kind of left me wanting a bit more, so I actually didn't really care for it. But it could have been a good film, and I think a lot of people think it is a good film, and I perfectly get that. I think if I had seen, it's one of those films that is sort of a little bit comes down to when you see it, whatever that means. It just kind of, yeah. Here's a documentary called Leaning into the Wind with Andy Goldsworthy. He's a really fascinating character. He's an artist who focuses on ephemeral art, if that's such a thing, if there's such a thing as that. But I've talked about him before. There's a documentary about him already from like 15 years before this. It's by the same guy too. And both of them are about him and simply about what he's doing and his art and his philosophy about why he's doing what he's doing. His philosophy, his explanations as to why he does what he does, why he is fascinated by the things he's fascinated with, stuff like that. I never really, I'm always sort of not on the same plane as he is. He sort of either goes over my head, or he's a bit too esoteric, or I don't really quite can't quite relate to what he's talking about. But what he does, on the other hand, is really quite fascinating. He creates art out of, well, from nature. I mean, there are a few examples here. They're not great pictures. But he rearranges nature in a way, creates patterns with leaves, or uses the colors from leaves. Like here, he just puts leaves up across or all along the stairway, and he does all kinds of stuff to create nice looking imagery out in the forest, or out in nature. And it's ephemeral, of course, because it's gonna get destroyed. Nature is gonna come and do its thing and ruin it after a while. Some of it is more fragile than others. So some things, if he puts leaves out in the forest, if the wind decides to come and blow them away, then that's gonna happen. You know, there's not much he can do to prevent it. So I imagine there's always also this kind of sense of completion when he does finish something. He of course takes pictures of them. I'm sure he's released books. I imagine that there's a sense of completion, like, oh man, this is finished now. And anyways, but there are moments of frustration, maybe more so in the first movie, where he just doesn't work out and the things fall apart. He spent hours on them and they just ruin, or they get ruined, and he needs to start over again. So it's really fascinating to watch him do all that. I did like the first movie a bit more. It's called Rivers and Tides. If you're interested in this, I'd recommend checking out the first one first. Rivers and Tides. Or you can just look up his name, I suppose. Yeah, this one takes a pretty similar approach. But I think, you know, you'll probably like it if you like the first one, because it's more of the same. But wasn't as good as the first one. Let's see if I have... Do I have more documentaries? I have one more documentary. I saw this yesterday. Well, I saw this over a couple of days, but I finished it yesterday. Weiwei, Never Sorry. So I don't know... I was gonna look that up, but I actually forgot to do it, so I'm gonna have to do that today. But he... what he does now, that is. But this movie takes place, or is filmed... Well, it says 2012, but a lot of the things that happen take place a few years before that. But he is a artist slash... you know, don't you just love it when you're sitting and you're talking about something and a word completely escapes you? Activist, there we go. And he is a Chinese citizen, and he talks about and shows in his art what he perceives to be a very sort of oppressive... I'm not saying it's not, but I'm just, you know, all I can say is that from his perspective, he lives in a undemocratic China, you know. He is not happy with the government doing some of the things they do, and so he wants to talk about that. He wants to show the world, and that's his mission, you know. And the film is simply about him and his projects, what he's done, his thought process and stuff like that. I was utterly captivated by it. There's something about it that is just so captivating and rather fascinating. And I will say, I mean, I really don't like his art or whatever, but his story is interesting and he's interesting. And well, speaking of his art, I've actually seen some of it in person, which I had no idea that it was him. I only realized it because they talk about the installation towards the end, where at the Tate Modern Museum in London, where I was years ago with my family, we went to the Tate London, the Tate Modern, and I actually filmed it too. There's a video on my channel, which is not great, but it's anyway. And one of the things that we saw was all these, what looked like sort of sunflower seeds, but we were told that they were hand painted. They covered the entire floor of the museum, or the first level. And that's on my channel, that's in the video. And apparently he made that. So the movie shows him, it shows them pouring all the seeds out, or it's porcelain, I think, and spreading them out. And so I thought that was kind of cool, because I had been there myself and seen that. Yeah, so really good film. I knew about that before. I was never really interested in seeing that before, but I decided to get it now, and I'm glad I did. Now, speaking of Randy Quaid, I was actually thinking about talking about these next to each other before, but you know, because I talked about the last detail. This one is called Real Time, with Randy Quaid and Jay Baruchel, which is sort of the last, I think the last film Randy Quaid was in, or at least the last starring role, or the last big role. Before, I mean, I don't know if you know exactly what's going on with him. There's a lot going on with him, and more than I can get into here. It's pretty crazy stuff, and something tells me he's not completely crazy. He's not a madman, which he appears to be. If you go to his YouTube channel, he might seem like, oh man, this guy has lost it. But I'm not convinced. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but I'm not convinced that it all comes down to him being crazy. So I'm looking. So it's hard not to discuss that, because it's such a wild thing. Some of the things Randy Quaid says. Well, I don't know what to think about it, but you might want to look it up if you don't know about it. But it's yeah, his last film before all that started happening, before his career went out the window. That's not the expression. I don't know what the expression is. Before his career, took a down. In my defense, I never speak English outside of my videos. See, I used to do that when I went to school. We were speaking English during class. I don't do that anymore, so I never practice. That's why I suck. But his career definitely not just slowed down, but completely stopped after this film. But it's not a great last film. It's well, he's not dead, but but it's a pretty interesting movie. It's called Real Time, and it takes place in real time too. It says an hour 30 minutes on the back, but it's not that long. It's just 1:15, I think. And one of those 1 hour of the film takes place in real time. So Jay Baruchel plays this guy who owes a bunch of money to Randy Quaid, and he has been given warnings, and he hasn't fulfilled the promise to repay. And so Randy Quaid finally decides to kill him, but to give him one last hour to live. And it's during this hour that the movie takes place. This is a premise where they could have gone several different ways, and the way they did go, they didn't really do a ton with it. It would have been interesting to see like a few different versions of that. And I'm not talking about like a Groundhog Day kind of thing, but a few different films, maybe made by a few different directors with the same premise. Maybe that has been done, that concept, but I'm just curious about what else could have happened during this hour. I mean, not too much does happen, but in a way that makes sense. Yeah. But it was good, although the ending felt a bit too over dramatic. I'm not sure exactly how they should have ended it. But the way they went, I guess it's not entirely surprising, but I can't say I was crazy about the ending. Another film that I wasn't crazy about is a film called That Good Night, which I had never heard of before, but I found this pretty cheap during a sale. John Hurt's his final lead role, and Sofia Helin, who's a Swedish actress who, I have to say, I didn't really think she was particularly great in this. It felt like she was trying to fit into a role rather than creating a character, or fit into a character rather than creating a character, if that makes sense. Like she, almost as if she thought that the character was supposed to act in a certain way, and she was just trying to kind of fulfill that. So she didn't feel completely believable. Otherwise, I like her. John Hurt, I also like him quite a bit. I love Charles Dance. He's a great one, a great actor. And I think the only interesting aspect of the film is his character, or their kind of relationship, if you're gonna use that word. It sort of takes place in a kind of fantasy or a dream or a metaphor, perhaps. And so that aspect was pretty interesting, but other than that, I can't say I liked it. Speaking of Charles Dance, swimming pool, he's only in this in the beginning and the ending, and then when the actual story takes place, like in between, he's not in that. But Charlotte Rampling is the leading role, and Ludwine Sagnier something. Her too, I don't know who she is. I bought the movie because of her, because of Charlotte Rampling. I thought this was really good for like the first half, and then it turned into some kind of erotic thriller. Well, the erotic part I was fine with, but I mean towards the end it turned into a little bit too much of a thriller, you know. And it felt a bit typical and a bit kind of bland, but I really did like her performance, and like the first half of the film when she goes from London, I guess, or at least from the UK to France to visit, to kind of go on a holiday or kind of escape for a while. She's a crime writer, and when she first gets to France and she kind of, you know, settles in, so to speak, like I love that aspect of the film. And when they meet also, like when that stuff gets going, yeah, I like that too. But then it just kind of falls apart at the end, man. Here we have a film called Demolition with Jake Gyllenhaal, Naomi Watts, and Chris Cooper. I'm a big fan of Jake Gyllenhaal. I mean, over the past several years, he's done a lot of interesting roles. This is one that I hadn't heard too much about, but I went in blind, and it's sort of unusual, a slightly unusual film. It's a drama, I would say, but it doesn't feel like a typical film. Typical film. It doesn't feel like it's. Well, let me just put it this way: that I never knew what was coming next, and I never knew what to expect from the next scene. It's an interesting film. It's hard to talk about. The main reason why I like it comes down to the title, like Demolition. Like it starts with a car accident right in the beginning of the film. His wife, I think they were married, or at least, well, they were together anyway. No, I think they were married. Anyway, so she dies in a car accident, and that sort of puts this massive crack, or this massive blow to the architecture of his entire life. Kind of reveals cracks everywhere, if you can imagine that. And so, to me, it felt like it explored that, how everything seemed to spiral out of control after that one big blow to his to the very fabric of his life. And to me, that's sort of what the title refers to a little bit. And then he goes about exploring that himself in the film. Like, there's one scene where he wants to borrow this big sledgehammer or whatever from a construction crew, and he pays them like $100 or whatever, and he goes in and just wrecks the place. It's just a fucking great scene, almost a comedic scene, and I think that was probably the point as well. But so that whole, I mean, I can't say exactly what it means, and I can't say too much more about it without spoiling the film. I guess there's not too much to spoil, but yeah, there's something about that which I found really intriguing, and they could have done more with it, but I really liked what they did, and it seems to be a lesser seen film, or a lesser talked about film, but it didn't make a huge splash, but it's pretty good. It's interesting. I actually really quite liked it, and my voice is breaking, but I'm gonna continue with the last few. Julian Donkey Boy, of course, it's a Harmony Korine film, and that's probably how most people know it. You know, it's a Harmony Korine film, But to me, the main reason why I wanted to see it now was because of him. And that's sort of the main reason why I like it as well. Well, the main thing I liked about it was his scenes. He plays the father of Julian, and I always thought that this was Julian, looking at the cover. I never realized that this is Chloe Sevigny. But hey, it's one of those things, one of those illusions, where if you look at it long enough, you see what you're actually supposed to be looking at. So I thought that I was looking at Julian all this time, all these years when I saw this cover. Anyway, that's not Julian. That's him. And he was in Trainspotting actually, which I only realized after seeing the film. But he was really good in this. But Werner Herzog plays the father, and he does such a good job. I even went back and re-watched a couple scenes because they were so bizarre and interesting. But I can't say that I was a big fan of it, but I have been thinking about it quite a bit, and it's growing on me. But it can be a bit hard to get into with how it's filmed, the style of filming. Okay, a few more. Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. This one I actually thought that I would like more than I did. It seems like a film that's perfect for me, for a film fan, because it's about this guy who makes purposefully or intentionally bad films, bad parodies of films. And I can't believe how esoteric some of this stuff is. Like in one part of the movie, once again, Werner Herzog, actually, he's not in it, but they talk about him quite a bit, and they show scenes from Burden of Dreams, which is the documentary that Les Blanc made about the chaotic production of the film Fitz. And one of the parodies that he makes, or that they make, is him playing Klaus Kinski freaking out on the set of Fitzcarraldo from the film Burden of Dreams. Like that just blew my mind, that he made a parody of Klaus Kinski in his white clothing, complaining about the conditions. Stuff like that was really fun to see, and it's really clear that they put a lot of work into all that, all the references and certain production design that they have to do to make the parodies what they are, stuff like that. Some animations as well, and a bunch of references, posters and films you see in the background. They put a lot of energy into that, but to me it kind of almost took a little bit from the character development, and I ended up not being too bothered when something happens, which maybe you know what I mean by that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it can be a bit hit or miss, or I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with references in movies, like film references in movies. Sometimes they can get a bit, maybe a bit indulgent, or maybe a bit having a bunch of references just for the sake of having references. And most of it was pretty well done in this one, I guess, but I just ended up not caring enough about the characters, I think. It's a really well-made film, but I wasn't a huge fan of it. So I think that's gonna have to do for this video. Thank you for watching. As always, I really appreciate it, and I will be back eventually when I have more stuff to talk about. Okay, see you then.